I would have to say that the core issue of our time in terms of human awakening is confusing the perspectives of ego and soul. Each in their own right, the various perspectives and experiences of the full human nature, which includes ego and soul, are not bad. The ego has its own perspective, its own experience. The human personality has its own perspective, its own experience. And our soul nature, which of course we are part of and is a part of us, also has a deeper perspective. But we have to know which is which and understand that there is a deep and a shallow perspective. A perspective of purely human experience, of observing this linear dimension of reality and experiencing ourselves as physical beings, and then a deeper perspective of our essential consciousness, our nature as an essential spirit. And we must learn to distinguish one from the other, because the greatest problems come about not because we have an ego, not because we are human, but because we mistake purely human perspective for the perspectives of the spirit and the soul. And there is a difference. There is a difference when it comes to looking at and reacting to our human experience, looking at the spectrum of vast happenings and personal tragedy or pain or hardship, looking at the great flow of history and where it's brought us in this moment, looking at issues of culture, of war and peace, of violence, of cultural debate, and even opposition and battle. There are so many things we are struggling with as humanity and as individuals. And in order to move forward with clarity, to make our way through, again, as individuals, but also as a human race, to make our way through to a world of peace and healing and freedom, we must understand the difference between our human personality and ego and our deeper spiritual nature. We have to be clear about where spirit is at work and what its perspective is, and where our human preferences and personality are at play. The ego, which is our purely human nature, is what feels fear, pain, hatred, and can, if disconnected from spirit, see existence as ultimately tragic. Because when the ego is not connected to spirit and experiencing only this linear plane of reality, it sees life as temporary and ending always in death, and it feels that existence is ultimately tragic and meaningless. This is when ego is cut off from the perspective of the soul. The soul sees this life as part of a much greater journey. The soul understands that this human experience is valuable, is beautiful, but it is also a small part of a much greater journey. And so for the soul, life is absolutely not tragic. Life is beautiful, and that spiritual perspectives allows us to experience the joys and beauty of this world, as well as the pain and the tragedy, without becoming weighed down by nihilism or depression or despair. And in times of tragedy, this is especially important. It is certainly natural, absolutely natural, to feel pain, and even to feel hate when we are harmed, wronged in a deep way, or those we love are harmed or wronged or destroyed. It is a natural human experience to feel anger, to feel pain, and even to feel hatred. But it is the experience of ego self, or the purely human personality, and not the perspective of ego. And those feelings, although natural and not bad, so to speak, they are not transcendent. They are not transcendent, and we cannot pretend that hatred and despair are ever transcendent. We can't judge ourselves for feeling human experiences, for feeling human emotions, for going through the process of dealing with human pain or tragedy. But we also must understand that there's a deeper perspective of spirit which transcends human pain, sorrow, and tragedy. The soul allows us all human feeling. It's not as if the spirit cuts us off from human feeling. There is nothing wrong with human feelings. There's nothing wrong with sorrow or anger. But the spirit asks us to move through these things, moving onward, rising into true faith, hope, and love. That's the difference. It's not as if we can't feel human emotions, especially in hard times or times of pain and tragedy. It's good and natural to feel human emotions and pain and sorrow, but it's not good ultimately to cling to these things through our lives and to make them the ultimate perspective on life. The Spirit asks us to move through these feelings, releasing them for a broader perspective on reality. The soul always allows us to do this in our own time. The soul does not push us, does not demand that we do not take our time, that we do not fully experience these things. It simply is asking and offering a path forward and through pain and suffering to a much broader perspective of reality, life, and self. That's the truth of soul. But soul allows us to choose this truth in our own way and time. It allows us to be human. It allows us to feel all range of human emotions, and it allows us to make mistakes. The soul never asks us to be perfect. That is the perspective of ego, and where there is a spiritual truth asking us to be perfect, we can see that it is not actually the soul, but actually the ego which is behind that. When the ego feels it is right, it pretends that it is better than others, it might pretend it's perfect, and it believes it has the right to force its truth upon others. Here is where there is that basic pattern of relationship which distinguishes perspectives of spirit and where the ego is at work. Where spirit is at work, you see the offering of a higher vision of life freely. Where ego is at work, you see the attempt to force truth on others. The soul understands truth, of course, but it offers it freely with an open hand. When it comes to quote unquote forcing truth, the cure is always worse than the disease, meaning that to force truth on another being, another person, another soul, is to break relationship. It is to break the ethic and pattern of relationship in which others are equal to ourselves. It is to break relationship, and that diminishes and even destroys any truth we might be offering. All spiritual truth will shape itself around the geometry of authentic relationship. Truth cannot be forced. This, if we want to look at a metaphysical vision of existence, is our relationship with God. That we as souls, as finite created souls, do not have the knowledge of ultimate consciousness, which we would call God, that infinite, ultimate ground of being, that all-knowing, all-loving, essential consciousness that gives rise to all life. Of course, we do not have the knowledge or the perspective or the wisdom or the freedom of infinite God, but that ground of being, that pure love and consciousness, never forces itself into us. It never forces us to be good or to be right, because that would destroy our nature as true beings. It would destroy relationship. And so even God does not force reality upon us. It is up to us to open ourselves in our process to reality as it is. And this perspective of relationship, the perspective of equality and offering truth with an open hand, can guide us through all of these issues of our time, these debates, these things we hear about on the news, all that's going on, from culture and value wars about what's right and wrong, what's uh, our human right to do or to express or not. We look at all of these issues around immigration and immigration policy, and the rise of xenophobia and the fear of those who are migrating throughout the world. We see capitalist monopolies that are monopolizing the resources of the earth and twisting what would be true capitalism into something which is all-consuming and oppressive and creates poverty. And we see extreme poverty and homelessness in every society, including the United States, including Western Europe, the so-called developed societies. Every issue that we can observe in the world today must be addressed, or according to this ethic of relationship in which we treat the other as equal to ourselves without judging it in any ultimate sense. That is the core basis for a free world, to treat others as equal to ourselves without judging them, yet also asking that all who would be part of our reality also respect this ethic, this shape of relationship, and allow us the freedom that they want. So we each have to do this and set one another free. This means we do have the right to demand that others set us free, just as we set others free. This is the balance between liberal and conservative ideology, the respect for cultural differences, and adherence to a universal code of humanity and human rights. This has to be balanced. And so this shape of relationship can show us a path forward in which we do respect and acknowledge the right for all preferences, all cultures, all faiths or lack of faith, all personal identity to exist, but we also do ask that each one of them allow everything else to exist. That is the one thing we demand of all culture, all preference, that it allows everything else to exist as long as everything else allows it to exist. So that's the balance. We can't try to homogenize human culture in order to keep it safe, but we do have to understand that the only way to avoid war and violence and the destruction of life is that we all collectively awaken to this ethic of relationship and ask that if people want to be free to practice their beliefs, to choose their identity, they do have to agree to live by this basic ethic of relationship and to make that promise not to destroy others, to destroy us. That is the one overall overarching value of relationship that we all must live under if we are to have a world that is at peace. And under that umbrella of non-destruction, under that umbrella that respects our right to be free and also respects others' right to the same freedom, under that umbrella, all views, all beliefs, all cultures, all preferences, all desires can exist, but only under such an accepting and relational umbrella of values can we be at peace with one another and free. People have the right to be free, choosing their own self-definition, their own identity, and their own path to awakening and consciousness. Now, not everyone who defines himself in this way or that way knows who they really are, but this is still their right. As long as we live according to the ethic of relationship, letting others have the freedom we want for ourselves, and not destroying or violently oppressing anyone against their will, then we can explore and develop as we choose. And a true teacher of consciousness will invite people into a vision of consciousness without ever seeking to subjugate others and to force them into this vision against their will. This will never happen with a true teacher of consciousness. And this is the problem with certain spiritual views, and the problem with some religion, is that some people or cultures think that being right or good means that we can force our way on others. This is the problem with some secular ethics and social theory as well. The idea that being right means that we have the right to force our way on others, and we never have the right to force our way on others as long as people are allowing us to exist and make our choice of belief. We never have the right to demand others believe as we believe or live under the umbrella of our particular point of view. That is not truth, and it's not spirit, because truth and spirit have to do with relationship, and relationship always has to do with the equality of the other. Conscious people realize that all true spirituality takes place in the context of relationship and equality. They also know that true spiritual messages are true. They're not insecure about their truth, and they don't think their truth has to be forced on others because they believe it. A truly awakened person is not insecure about their truth. But ultimately, it just comes down to the fact that we must learn to live in relationship and non-destruction, not destroying others. And in this relational reality, everyone must be free to make their own choices. This is the only way to a free world, a free human culture, and to the openness that will allow true human spiritual awakening in the evolution of consciousness toward a broader understanding of reality. You know, our nature, our very nature as human but also spiritual beings, will eventually lead us all to the truth, the reality of relationship and love. Because the shape of ourself, as I have often said, is that we are a single point of experience in an infinite reality, and we can only access reality through authentic relationship to that which is other than ourselves. That is our shape, that is our nature, and our nature will eventually, it may take time, it may take a journey through levels of hell, but eventually it will lead all of us to the truth of relationship and love. And so, no matter who we are or what we feel, we can know that every desire has a core truth behind it, a core desire behind it that tells us something about who we truly are. Only the core authentic thing can satisfy our true self, and that's what we have to understand, that if we pursue shallow desire and shallow fulfillment and shallow power, we can't ever be fully satisfied, and the awakened person understands that they must get to the authentic core version of every desire in order to find true fulfillment. The free exploration of life eventually leads to truth because of this. Because only the core authentic thing can fulfill us, then a truly free exploration of life will lead us to the truth of ourself. The awakening being finds that only authentic relationship leads to true fulfillment. Once conscious enough, a being understands that the only way to life is through true, authentic relationship, the honest knowledge of self, admitting what we truly are, and learning to express that in a relational way. That is the path to fulfillment. And as we awaken to a high enough level of consciousness, we will always choose that path. That is what we must learn as human beings, to seek the core desire behind whatever we are feeling. This core desire will lead us to our true selves. This is a journey we take in whatever way we choose, but it is a journey of finding our authentic nature as human and spiritual beings. So the basic clarification here is to understand the difference between core desire, core experience, and the shallow desires of ego. To understand the difference between spirit and ego. Ego is blind and ego is afraid. Soul is eternal and soul is not afraid. That's the core understanding we must come to in order to distinguish and not to confuse the soul nature with the human ego nature. And again, that is the point. It's not about hating the ego or fearing the ego or trying to run away from the fullness of what we are. It's about clarification and understanding that allows us to put the horse in front of the cart, so to speak, to use an old term. It's not like we have to destroy the ego. That's a vision of ego, that ego has to be destroyed. If you have the cart in front of the horse, the point is not to smash the cart up and destroy it. What good would that do? You need to have clarification of what will work and put the horse in front of the cart. And that's the same with ego. We have to have spirit in charge of the direction of our lives. But that is not about destroying ego or hating our human nature or fearing anything that we are. It's about understanding and awakening into consciousness. The soul is not afraid. Spirit is not fleeing from life or even pain. It simply wants to offer a way forward and beyond the purely human experience. It wants to draw human experience into a broader perspective of reality. But the soul is not afraid of ego. It just asks us to know what is ego and what is soul. The ego is afraid, so it hates what it doesn't understand or what threatens it. The ego is what fears sin and attachment. The ego is what hates ego. The ego hates what it thinks of as evil, but not the soul. The soul is not afraid of what we call evil, because the soul is eternal. The soul cannot be destroyed. In authentic awakening, we move beyond the fear and despair of purely human perspective into a much broader vision of life. And in this, we do not lose the human experience. We actually become more engaged and more human, if you want to put it that way. Even as we're freed from depression and despair, we become more engaged in authentic relationship with others, with this world, and with life. True spirituality, the eternal and infinite view of our soul, does not disengage us from human experience. It fills it and fulfills it. The goal of the soul is to be fully embodied in this human experience, and filling this experience to open and evolve humanity forward into an awakened state. Becoming a spiritual person does not take away our ability to enjoy life, to be present. It allows us to be more present. Spirit wants to bring us to transcendence through the true fulfillment of authentic human experience. That is where our human self and experience opens itself fully to the vastness of pure consciousness of spirit and evolves into a higher consciousness that can hold the free, vast beauty of our soul. That's the point of life. That's the point of becoming a spiritual being and awakening. It's to experience this life more fully. And that's the deep perspective. The deep perspective is a ultimately positive perspective that's drawing us forward into a glorious future, a glorious destiny of awakening that allows all of our authentic humanity to exist and to be fulfilled. And it allows us to be in free and fulfilling relationship to all reality and all beings. That is the perspective of soul, and that's what we must understand. And that can guide us forward through all of the issues and pains and problems of our time, and all of our personal experience and issues and problems and pains into a peace and a fulfillment and an awakening which will truly save ourselves and this world.